Okay, thank you very much. I am Kathy Kelly, and I have lived in New York State all my life, but in various places in New York State. And for a few years recently, I lived near Alley Pond Park in Douglaston, Queens. And that's right on the edge of New York City, near uh, near the county line. And it's such an interesting park. I thought it'd be a good presentation to share with everybody about the diversity in an urban New York City park. Um, so if you have any questions, I guess they'll come at the end, or you can let me know if there's anything I need to explain as I go along. So are you seeing like the people on the side? Is that also, can I get rid of that? Just show, okay. So Alley Pond Park and Queens is all about location, location, location. So wanted to start with showing the location in the physiographic region of southern New England. It's in the Atlantic coastal plain down in New York City. And here is another view with Manhattan over on the left side. This is where Long Island Sound goes into Little Neck Bay and down into Alley Pond Park. And this is the close-up map. Actually, it doesn't show Little Neck Bay up here because there's no hiking trails. This focuses on the part of the park where there's hiking trails and many other activities besides walking trails. I'm going to obviously focus on the natural parts of the park today. And first, I do need to talk a little bit about the history. Originally, of course, the area was home to the Matinecock people, and the 1630s is when King George started giving out land grants in the area, and many different types of mills were built south of Little Neck Bay. And I know you can read a lot of this. I'm not going to go through every bullet here, but in the mid 1800s, the area had a thriving commercial shell fishery, and you might even eat little neck clams yourself. You wouldn't get them from Little Neck Bay nowadays, but oh, sorry, that's what they're known for. And in fact, that's why the Tinicot people settled there as well. It was a great area for little neck clams and oysters and all sorts of wildlife. And through such a great place to live with a bounty of fresh water, salt water, and all types of food and available land, population grew rapidly. From the 1910s to the 1920s, it doubled, and the wetlands and marshes were mostly filled in for the development and the highways. And as early as 1909, the shellfish beds were closed due to pollution. And as the Grand Central Parkway and first the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway and Long Island Expressway were built all around it, it put on more pressure and pollution to the area. And in the 70s, I'm sorry, in the 60s, after also being used as a dumping ground, citizens started to clamor for restoration and preserve the Alley Pond wetlands, or they were just called the Alley Wetlands or the Alley Creek Wetlands then. And so I'll talk a little bit more about some of those other bullets later. So you could see I don't know if this is the first USGS map, but this is the first one I could find. And to give you a little bit of orientation here, this railroad is the Long Island Railroad. And so now it's the Long Island Railroad now. It was a railroad in 1890. Oops, sorry, little touchy on the mouse there. Sorry. This is the same railroad here. So you can see where the Little Neck Bay was more open water all the way down into this area, which over time, as these areas became developed, this area also filled in with reeds and was landfilled, actually intentionally filled by people, and is no longer that open water. But Little Neck Bay feeds into Alley Creek here. And so this is the change over time. And oh, I forgot to mention about the size of the park. The entire park is 635 acres, at least. Sometimes it's said to be 655 acres, but it's 635 acres by most accounts. It's the second largest park in the Queens, borough of Queens, and the ninth largest park in New York City. And 570 acres of it is protected as forever wild as the Alley Pond Park Preserve. So the entire park is protected as a park, but 570 acres are protected as forever wild. So even though it's not the largest park, I do believe that it is the most diverse in habitat types. We have all of these, here's the list with the size of each type of habitat. The marine habitat covers about 6 acres. And by the way, let me just go back a little bit here. Sorry. Oh, I don't have the map with, I thought I had other New York City parks, but you could see these little other green areas. There are other parks that connect with this Alley Pond Park and that are nearby. So there's also connectivity to other habitats as well. But within Alley Pond Park proper, there's 6 acres of marine habitat. And obviously this is not in size order. 98 acres of salt marshes and 50 acres of freshwater wetlands. And just skipping down to the largest area is 440 acres of upland forests. So, quite a few of these habitats by themselves are pretty large. The forests themselves is quite an expansive area. So, of course, with that many different types of habitat, we have a lot of different wildlife, plants and animals and birds. So most common trees are tulips, tulip trees, oak trees and beeches. And locally and state rare plants include bloodroot, Christmas fern, pink lady slippers, and the salamanders, two-line salamanders, as well as the more rare spotted salamander. Alley Pond Park provides some of the last remaining habitat in New York City for rare animals like the spotted salamander. And there are, I believe there are currently about 4 or 6 osprey nesting sites that have been built within the marine areas of Alley Pond Park. And probably the best indication of the number of species that have been studied within the park can be found in iNaturalist, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But to date, approximately 1,600 species of all types have been listed in iNaturalist, and many of them, not most of them, but many of them have been verified. And separately in eBird, there are birds amongst these 1,600 species in iNaturalist, but eBird separately shows 228 separate bird species have been found in the area. So as I have already mentioned, with the pressures in the area and pollution, landfilling, you could see, I mentioned the Long Island Railroad is in that area. There's a lot of different activities that have degraded the quality of the marine resources. And like I said, the little neck clams cannot be consumed from that area, and they're hard to find. So these are actually called oyster oyster castles, excuse me. And this was started in 2021. And you may have heard of the Billion Oyster Project. And this is part of New York City's Billion Oyster Project. So this is what these oyster castles look like. They're kind of like Lego bricks made of concrete. And the team goes in during low tide and they put down these planks so they can get out to where they need to be and build these Lego bricks of oyster castles. And sorry to say, I could not get a good picture of the kind of repopulation of the oyster castles since they were started to since the initial building in 2021. But I am told they are doing pretty well. The only thing about the oysters that they use to populate the oyster castles, a lot of study went into the species that should be used, and in order to maintain to rebuild and to maintain the habitat, the species of oysters that were chosen are not really tasty. So it would be too easy for people to go out and just harvest the oysters from these castles, and then there would be no more. So it was intentionally chosen to not be a desirable source of food for people so that they could continue to grow and repopulate the area. So the other thing I wanted to say about the marine habitat is it includes Little Neck Bay itself, beaches, and tidal mudflats. So as you go further towards Alley Creek from Little Neck Bay, becomes salt marshes, and the change in elevation here and the changing salinity is really important to the ecology here. And this is Spartina salt marsh with the brackish marsh. So this is obviously at low tide. This is the same location. This bird is in the same location at higher tide as this low tide location on the right. So, and you can see some upland forests in the background. So the next area of habitat that has been identified in Alley Pond Park is freshwater wetlands, and there's a total of about 50 acres of freshwater wetlands, including areas of Phragmites and meadows and ponds and lakes. These two pictures are both Oakland Lake, which was a natural lake in the area that was then maintained. There are two other slightly they're smaller than Oakland Lake. This photograph does not really give you a good picture of the extent of the lake. I wanted to show the reeds and the different habitats along the shore. But there's also Alley Pond and Little Alley Pond in the park. And this is a little bit difficult to see, but this is a trumpeter swan nesting in the marshes. And this is very close to the walkway. which is very well traveled. So the animals are quite used to people here. So this is the next type of habitat is freshwater streams, and there's about 7 acres of freshwater streams in Alley Pond Park with riparian corridors and floodplain forest, excuse me, including Alley Creek. And there is a buried tributary of Alley Creek that's basically sewered as well. And that's about it for freshwater streams in the area, but it takes up about 7 acres. And then there are about a similar amount of forested freshwater wetlands at 8 acres, including vernal pools and kettle ponds. There's at least 3 that are natural ponds, and then there's a few man-made ponds in the area as well. And I forgot to mention the geology of the area is, of course, if you're familiar with the geology of Long Island at all, it's a terminal moraine, and that runs right through this park area as well. So as the glaciers receded, boulders also were moved around, and these little kettle lakes were formed in the area as well. So this is a nice picture of the spotted salamander, which of course starts off in the water, but it lives most of its life in the forest. The vernal pools are really a short-term type of habitat occurring in the spring, basically around this time of year, from snow melt and then drying up a little bit. And animals like the salamander, the spotted salamander, head to the hills and a little bit more dry land as the kettle pond, excuse me, as the vernal pools and the kettle ponds dry up. So there are numerous springs, freshwater springs in the park. This is one that has a man-made casing in it, where there were, it was very popular for folks to come and fill up their water bottles for their household in this area. In fact, one of the big businesses in the 1600s in this area was selling spring water to local businessmen and people that were coming to recreate in the area. So this is my friend Mike Piccolello is measuring the depth of this casing down to the origin of the spring. It is quite deep. So there are numerous springs, but the area of freshwater wetlands that are created by the springs is fairly small, at less than 1 acre. So there are significant acreages of forest in Alley Pond Park, and the southern forest is the largest part, obviously well named in the southern end of the park. And the west side is the tulip tree forest, and a lot of oaks in the area around Oak Pond and Oakland Lake, uh, so named as well. Very, very easily named areas here. Um, so there were more forested areas, and city parks and volunteers continue to work on forest restoration in the more degraded sites where tidal marshes were filled in with landfill or with garbage. And I do have a picture of that later, but some of the best birding in the park, and the entire park is great for birding. I'm not a birder myself, but I did go with the Queens County Bird Club on a few forays into the park, and it's just a really rich area, especially during migration. And New York City Audubon has really recommended this as one of the best places in the area to go birding. The richest biodiversity can be found in the kettle ponds and the adjacent upland forest. And there's some more rare species in that area, including the scarlet tanager. And of course, I've already mentioned the spotted salamander, which is a rare, it's called an obligate amphibian. And they start off in the vernal pools and spend most of their year in the forest. This is the alley pond giant. I found it difficult to take a photograph, but it's said to be the oldest living being in New York City, and it is considered to be 300 to 450 years old, somewhere in that range. It's over 110 feet tall, and the circumference is 8.5 feet, 18, excuse me, 18 and a half feet. And it's so big, unfortunately, someone set the base of the tree on fire. It is still alive, but there is a hollow inside. It's so big, a person can get inside the trunk. And fortunately, they've gated it off, but it is still a popular place to go. So I always marvel at how well animals like the owl can hide in the trees here. If you see that on the right. Um, how did Alley Pond become so diverse? It's got a lot of things going for it. Of course, it's in a maritime climate between Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean, and obviously warm, humid summers and cold winters. The superficial geology there has a lot of variety and a good depth of bedrock. So there's a lot of overburden. There are changes from boulders on the hillsides to scattered kettle ponds. There's um, changes in elevation. There's changes in salinity. So that provides a lot of opportunity for variety of habitat and a diversity of wildlife. And besides the anthropogenic fill or the man-made fill, there's a variety of soil classes. And in the salt marshes, you have the mucky peats, and in the wetlands, you have the hydric soils, and in the woodlands and the meadows, you have other types of soil complexes providing a good deal of variety. And then, of course, moving from the marine Little Neck Bay environment to the freshwater creek, you have all uh, changes in salinity amongst those areas. So obviously, due to the now very urban environment and the changes over time and the continued changes, there are a lot of impacts and stressors to the habitat in the area. Um, and I meant to mention earlier that most of the information that I obtained about the types of habitat, I used the national, I'm sorry, the New York City Parks habitat assessments from the 80s. 1987 was the one time they did a extensive habitat assessment and identified both the habitats that existed and what their stressors were. Um, but the stressors are obvious. Industrial pollution, stormwater and sewage, the development and fragmentation of the habitats, and climate change as well. And I haven't spoken to it much today, but there are extensive invasive species throughout the park and in most of the areas in, I guess really throughout Long Island and Vineland areas. In fact, the the that is one of the greatest threats to many of the trees in the forest is vinelands, invasive species. And now it is a time of attention and resources and advocacy in Alley Pond, but as you know, mentioned earlier, with times it was landfilled by city government agencies. And so there what has been lack of resources and advocacy over time at various points of history. So these are all stressors to the environment and the individual habitats. There's also a diverse human interests and needs, or diverse types of human interests and needs. The people in Queens are very diverse. If you're familiar with the area, you know that's the place with the greatest number of languages spoken anywhere on Earth. Alley Pond itself, in some of the policy reports about Alley Pond, they have maps with the turfs of different types of stakeholders, different activity groups. There's numerous regulatory requirements for any activities within the park or the use of land and oversight in different types of things. So there's a number of local, state, and federal agencies involved, some with funding, which is very helpful. I focused on the habitats, but even in amongst those habitats, the other sports activities and uses kind of flow into those areas as well. So there's a lot of other activities in the park, and there are not-for-profit stakeholders and interest groups that are involved as well. And of course, this group of master naturalists, I don't need to tell you about how important parks are for environmental health, our human health, and for the climate and air quality and water quality. And all of these diverse interests and needs put pressure on the park, but also have the potential for providing advocacy, providing resources, gardening, planting, pushing the government agencies to do more. So it's very important to recognize the human interests, especially in an urban park. So I felt like having volunteered at so many different activities in the park, there are always solutions, and master naturalists do a lot of things like planting pollinator gardens. That happens a lot in Alley Pond too. A lot of this is supported or driven by people at the Alley Pond Environmental Center. This is their new building. They just, within the last few weeks, had an opening of this new environmental center. And I think it's really important. It's one of the things I love about the Master Naturalist program is the educational opportunities, receiving them as a person, and helping to educate other people as well. So that leads to involvement, and you always have a few people in the community that become the spark plugs and the energy around which one activity or a whole community coalesces. And so I want to talk a little bit about citizen science in a minute. That's an important piece of studying and recognizing and maintaining habitat too. This is one of the tree plantings that this particular one was done last fall. This is in one of the areas of Alley Pond near the creek where it was a very degraded area. It had originally been a tidal marsh and it had become a landfill area. And at one time, it had become a junkyard of cars. And then the cars caught fire and the trees caught fire and it was cleaned out. And we've been doing planting in there for a few years. I did quite a bit of planting in that area, but this was last year's trees that were mulched this spring. And so now to talk a little bit about citizen science. So this is not I don't know, I wish I could have pulled a better picture. This is kind of a funny picture of the iNaturalist website. Sorry. And iNaturalist, if you're not familiar with it, and I think a lot of us are, but it's it started at Stanford University, and now it is a standalone entity where any citizen scientist can download the app, and you can see on your phone, you can take a picture and identify a plant, an animal, or a bird, and put in the information, and then other naturalists look at it and confirm it, or perhaps say, don't you think this is something a little bit different? And then it can be verified or just be a data point that is not verified. And I think something happened to my next screen. Okay, so in Alley Pond Park, there's a group of folks called EcoQuest. It's a pretty small group. And we had Daniel Atha from the New York Botanical Garden come out and show us how to use iNaturalist. And in New York City, they have a New York City EcoFlora, EcoQuest, where each month there's a particular plant. It's usually a plant because it's flora. It's not always a plant though. A particular plant is the quest for the month. So you might look for, often it's invasives or something that's a lot of people can recognize and see so that they can become involved. But sometimes it is also part of research being done by a particular botanist at the botanical garden or biologist. And so it's a great way to get people involved in citizen science and also obtain good data for researchers. And John Versey was one of well, he still is, part of the group in Alley Pond. And he did a floristic quality assessment of Alley Pond Park using iNaturalist data that was input over about a 4-year period, I think, and ended up writing a few articles and contributed to research with the New York Botanical Garden on the floristic assessment of Alley Pond Park and testing a certain methodology as well. And the information that was found from iNaturalist was determined to be very useful, and the information was determined to be very good quality, which is really terrific because, like I said, citizen scientists can be anybody. They don't need to be, you don't even need to be an adult. So you could be a kid and be a citizen scientist and put this information into iNaturalist. And the data also bore out that the area of Alley Pond is uh, a bit of a degraded area, and can also see just from the data which areas are more degraded than others, like that area where I just showed you, which had been a landfill area. So it's if you're using iNaturalist, that's great. And if you don't use it, I encourage you to check it out and perhaps get involved with that. And if you have a particular area that you are involved with, you could make that area a specific project, like delineate specific area to track year after year and have that data available to future people, researchers, gardeners, and master naturalists. So I thank you for listening to me, and I hope you have some questions for me.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you very much. That looks like a very beautiful area. I'm always surprised that how many really nice parks and still natural habitat are in New York City. We do have some questions.
I actually tried to visit as many as possible and tracked which ones I visited.
Oh, okay.
There are a lot.
Yes, have you been to Inwood Hill?
Yes,
I love
really
that
neat.
park.
Yeah,
It's
it's
so
really
beautiful.
neat.
You step into the forest there and it's as if you are somewhere in the big woods. Let's see. Somebody asked, oh, Dave asked, what are kettle ponds? You may have answered that, but do you have a little more?
So kettle ponds are they can be very small, and they could be, I mean, they could be the size of a car, and they're created by boulders from the glaciers that have been dropped and then moved and then, you know, skittered across the ground and create these little small depressions. And so it's they're very small, and so they're very easily overlooked as an important habitat, but they are the vernal pools and the kettle ponds are very, very important habitats because they're the only places where certain types of amphibians um, um, start out their life. And so this is the time of year where the biologists are going out and looking for the egg masses and determining which kinds of frogs or salamanders are going to be in that area, and if there is a potential for rare ones or protected, threatened, and endangered species. And that's what a kettle pond is.
Okay, thank you. Rick asked, do people still draw water from the springs to consume? And if so, is it regulated or checked for contaminants?
Yes and no and no.
Oh.
Because it is not a community water supply. I actually, my career is in water infrastructure. So um it's a funny place there because it's very close to some residences, and it's that area of the park is not really the visitors are more people that are like diehard walkers and hikers or the residents nearby. And even when I would go there with my group, there would be residents that would come over and be like, what are you doing here? And what are you doing here? They don't want you near the spring. And it is not a community water source. It is not meant, it's not operated. It's not regulated. It's not a water supply, but definitely people go there and get their water. And there you could, I live in the Catskills now, and almost every day I drive by another spring that's a little pipe that comes out of the side of the hill next to a road nobody regulates that, but every day there's people with big jugs filling it up with water. So I can't tell you what it's contaminated with or what it's not. I didn't drink from it because I wasn't comfortable, but Poland Spring water, all of those things, they come out of the same type of water source. They just happen to be regulated.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Joellen asked, are there deer in the park? They often exacerbate invasive species issues.
Absolutely. And Joellen, we used to be neighbors. Hi, it's so good to see you.
It's been
Um,
driving me crazy. It's like, how do I know this woman? I know this woman.
our kids played together.
They did.
Um, so I'm sorry, I did forget your question. Oh, dear.
Dear.
So yes, so we don't I don't know how many deer are in Alley Pond Park. I've never seen a deer. Um, there could be deer. Um, I don't know, but I've never, no one's ever told me they've seen a deer there, but um they could make their way from somewhere. We have seen foxes. We've seen red foxes. Um, you didn't ask about those. So I don't know about deer in Alley Pond Park.
I suspect that there are not, but I was, and I think you would have mentioned it.
I've never seen deer poop either.
Okay.
And I would guess not just by the plant species that you told me that are there, the lady slipper and whatnot. Deer love lady slippers. So.
When you showed the trees, I was just like, oh yeah, they don't have deer.
We have plenty of invasive species though.
Yeah.
Okay. Peter asked, so the bird species change significantly with the seasons, the birds that are there?
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a lot of migratory birds. So the bird species do change. There's it's such a good habitat there. You don't even really see a lot of like sparrows, but like I said, I'm not a birder, especially so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but yeah, there's definitely a change of life amongst the birds and in the seasons. It's really close. I mean, it's right between Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean, so it's a really great migratory pathway in that area too.
Okay. Is there any issue with saltwater intrusion into the freshwater areas?
So it's more of not it's so it's it's a constant flow because the source how do I answer this? Well, I don't know what the percentage of the source of Alley Creek is uh marine marine salty water versus the freshwater springs. If there were no freshwater springs there, it would be you wouldn't, there would be just more of a salt marsh, brackish water type of creek. But um the the creek really kind of geographically originates from Little Neck Bay. It's a it, it the whole thing is very tidally influenced with a lot of freshwater runoff and the springs. It's all kind of like depends upon the time of day and the time of year and the tides and the precipitation. So it's all of a mix. So in terms of issue, I'm not sure what kind of issue that you're asking about, but it's just part of the system being mixed together with fresh water and salt water.
Well, Kathy, I guess the issue would be is the salt water moving inland more than you would expect it to, or is it receding out? I mean, normally in a metropolitan area, don't you have an issue with saltwater intrusion coming inland and affecting whatever your freshwater aquifer is, right?
So the thing is, the water in that area, public water supply is not drawn from the aquifer.
Okay, okay.
And that well water, that spring water from that well is no salt. It's pure aquifer water. But I don't know what the studies are in that area exactly. So, I mean, you'd have to look at the USGS studies. I'm sure there's a lot of information about that question that you're asking. I wasn't sure what you were asking. I should have just asked you to rephrase at the begin with.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and then Kathy, the last question, Peter asks, is there a good deal of environmental education happening at the park to help people connect with the park?
So I haven't actually been involved with the environmental education there in a while, and the Alley Pond Educational Center was open, but in a temporary location until the new place was built and it just had its grand opening. And that education does focus on school children, and they have, they have animals, they have animals that have been rescued and rehabilitated, and guinea pigs and turtles, all sorts of things like that. And they also have a lot of education about the natural areas there, and the education building is right in it's a great area for walking around with boardwalks leading out to the salt marsh. And they actually do measure the salinity in the salt marsh every day. And that's part of the environmental education. But for adults, I think it's a little bit more like you have to seek it out for yourself. I know it's really more based on college education, right? Like Queensborough College and um, the colleges and universities in the area.
Okay, thank you very much.